back here at Christ Church. It has been a while since the Georgia Historical Society has had a program here. We want to thank Christ Church and Reverend Zappa for hosting us here tonight. We also want to thank the book lady for providing copies of Michael Thurmond's book, James Oglethorpe, Founder of Georgia, Founder's Journey from Slave Trader to Abolitionist. They will be for sale tonight. You can buy those, and the program will be followed by a book signing this evening. Tonight's program is the keynote address of the Georgia History Festival, which is the signature K-12 education program of the Georgia Historical Society that teaches history to students all across the state. 250,000 students are reached by this program every year. More information about the program can be found about the Georgia History Festival can be found at the festival website, which is georgiahistoryfestival.org, and that is in your program. And I would encourage you, please, to get involved in the Georgia Historical Society. We can't do this kind of programming without your support and without your involvement. The Georgia Historical Society is the statewide, independent, educational, and research institution that is responsible for collecting and teaching Georgian and American history. And with your support, we can continue to do that, because we all know that there's probably never been another time when teaching history is more important than it is right now. So I would encourage you, please get involved with the Georgia Historical Society. The event sponsor for tonight's program is Hyundai. We would like to acknowledge Hyundai's support not only of this program, but also of the entire festival. They are one of our signature sponsors. In addition to Hyundai, I'd also like to thank our other trustee sponsor, the Home Depot, and our festival sponsors, Chick-fil-A, Delta Airlines, Georgia Power, and Gulfstream. And I would also like to recognize, or do we have any members of the Board of Curators of the Georgia Historical Society with us tonight? Any members of our board that are here? I hadn't seen them. Up top, okay, Jeff Gold. Thank you, Jeff, for being here tonight. Well, it's an honor for me to introduce our speaker, the Honorable Michael Thurmond. There are many ways to describe Michael Thurmond. Mike is a self-made man, descendant of enslaved people and the son of a sharecropper. Mike was the first person in his family to attend college, earning not only a bachelor's degree, but also a law degree. He's an extraordinary political leader. He was the first African-American elected to the state legislature from Clark County, Georgia, since Reconstruction. He's been the director of the Division of Family and Children's Services, superintendent of the DeKalb County Public Schools, commissioner for the Georgia Department of Labor, and most recently, CEO of DeKalb County, an office that he has held now for 8 years. He is a skillful lawyer who enjoyed a successful career at the prestigious firm of Butler and Wooten. Now, Butler and Prather are honored to have Jim Butler and his wife Kim with us this evening. Mike is an exceptional public speaker. I have heard dozens of his presentations, and he has never failed to hold his audience spellbound, both by his eloquence and by the power of his words. He is a gifted writer and a gifted historian. He's the author of 3 important books, including Freedom, Georgia's Anti-Slavery Heritage, which won the Georgia Historical Society's Little Halls Award. The book he's talking about tonight is the first biography of James Edward Oglethorpe, written by an African American, and it changes how we understand the founder of Georgia. Now, all of these are apt and accurate descriptions of Mike Thurmond. But the best way that I know of to describe him, both as a man and as a leader, is to say that he is a great unifier. No one excels him at building bridges between races, genders, political parties, and communities. There's a reason why he was the first African American elected to statewide office without prior appointment. He has a special skill for bringing people together to achieve a common goal. In many ways, Mike resembles the extraordinary man he is going to talk about tonight. Like James Edward Oglethorpe, Mike is a visionary leader who wants to help Georgia to grow and to live up to its potential. Like Oglethorpe, Mike is a dedicated public servant known for his integrity and for doing the right thing for the right reason. Like Oglethorpe, Mike has an innate understanding of people and finds a way to bring out the best in them. And like Oglethorpe, Mike has a dream of creating a world where all people have an equal opportunity to succeed. In many ways, Mike Thurmond embodies the values of the founders of Georgia, the Georgia trustees, whose motto was non sibi sed alis, which in English means not for self, but for others. Now, I have known Mike Thurmond for nearly 30 years. He served on the Georgia Historical Society board. We have worked together on many projects, mainly historical works, that have attempted to tell the full and honest story about the past, not to divide us, but to heal us and to unite us. He has been an advisor, a mentor, and a friend. He has helped me. He has helped me to see the world in a different way. The highest compliment that I can pay to him is to say that I'm a better person, I'm a better leader, and the Georgia Historical Society is in a better institution because of him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium a great Georgian and one of the finest people that I know, the Honorable Michael Thurmond.
Good evening. First, let me thank my friend, my inspiration, my mentor, my confidant, a fellow historian, a great Georgian, who has transformed the Georgia Historical Society. It's opened doors that for centuries have been closed, telling a more complete story about who we are and helping us more to understand who we can become. That is this man, Dr. Todd Ross. Give him a round. To interim rector of Christ Church, Reverend Kathy Zappa. To this church and to the Georgia Historical Society, I thank you for honoring me with this opportunity to stand and to speak in the historic Christ Church, the mother church of Georgia. As a student of philosophy, religion, and Georgia history, I am so privileged and honored and delighted to be able to walk in the theological footsteps of John Wesley, George Whitfield, John Rennie, Bartholomew Zelmerhuth. All these men were rectors of Christ Church, and more importantly, they were all pioneering early 18th century anti-slavery evangelists. This church sits at the heart of what we know was James Oglethorpe's original vision for Georgia. I am delighted to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Casey Field and her middle school scholars from Savannah Classical Academy. Would you all please stand? Please, just stand. CEO Barry Lawless is also here. Young people represent 20% of our population, but in fact, they are 100% of our future. We are studying the history of Georgia, but these young men and women will make history in the near future. Another round of applause. Thank you. I must acknowledge Mayor Otis Johnson, my role model, my friend. Dr. Johnson, please stand. An amazing leader. Is here, my friend. Raise your hand, Jim Butler. Where's Jim? Where's Jim Butler? He was my boss. Stand up, Jim Butler, one of the most successful trial lawyers in America. He gave me a chance to come practice law in his law firm, and I went down to see him in Columbus, Georgia, and I had the crazy idea to run for the U.S. Senate against Johnny Hutchinson, who was by far the most popular human being on the planet at that time. And I went in to talk to Jim, and I was running for the Senate, and he said, well, I'm gonna write you a check. He maxed out, wrote me a check. As I turned to walk out, he said, but you know you're gonna lose. I said, Mr. Butler, I don't know that I'm not certain I'm going to. Oh yeah, you're gonna lose. I said, I don't think so. He said, well, I'll tell you what, Mike. If you lose, call me up. I want you to come work at my law firm. Change my life. Give him another round. And while I worked at the law firm, he was the first person to read a draft of what became James Oglethorpe, father of Georgia. Thank you, James. So many other people are here. Amina Glass. She is the spirit of Susan King Taylor. Love you so much. Thank you so much. On this rainy fall evening, we of differing racial, ethnic, and religious persuasions have gathered on hallowed ground under a common roof, an ornate and beautiful roof, for a common purpose. Black and white, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, PhDs, and no Ds, have gathered at this time, at this historic place, to re-examine, celebrate, and commemorate the life and legacy of General James Edward Oglethorpe, the founding father of Georgia. More though than the fact that we are here to celebrate, to commemorate, to re-examine, I am hopeful that tonight's presentation and the 2024 Georgia History Festival in its totality will be and provide inspiration to all of us who are the inheritors of James Oglethorpe's unique legacy. If we are mindful, let us use this night to inspire us, to inform us, to not just celebrate, not just commemorate, but let's rededicate ourselves to fulfilling his original vision for Georgia. Where you see Oglethorpe and his fellow trustees envision Georgia as a Zion in the wilderness, a place where England's worthy poor and Christian free in persecution will be given a second chance to achieve financial security by working and living on small farms. And my friends, a cornerstone of that inclusive and inspiring vision was a belief that all human beings, regardless of their race, their color, their creed, their socioeconomic condition, or legal status, would have value in the eyes of God. This ever-expanding original vision for Georgia would come to include debtor prisoners, Reverend Zappa, prisoners, the unemployed, the homeless, persecuted Christians from throughout Europe, Native Indians, Jewish immigrants, and most significantly, this vision would include free and enslaved black people. As we gather tonight in Christ Church, Oglethorpe's church, we must not overlook the fact that James Oglethorpe's faith played a key role in shaping and informing what became known as the Georgia Plan. And the cornerstone of this 18th century economic development and social welfare experiment was the precept of God's eternal grace. In October 1996, I was a member of a 57-person Georgia delegation that traveled to England to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the birth of James Oglethorpe. On October the 6th, we visited Oglethorpe's boyhood home in the little village of Godalming. Later that day, we worshiped at the parish church of St. Peter and St. Paul. This was the church where Oglethorpe and his family worshiped when he was just a young child. We listened to a sermon preached by Reverend John Ash entitled Oglethorpe's Life as God's Grace in Action. Oglethorpe's life as God's grace in action. Reverend Ash stated that the founding of the colony of Georgia gave people an opportunity for a new start, perhaps a second chance after failure. And that is the principle which lies at the heart of the gospel. And the gospel declares an eternal truth that all people have worth in the value in the eyes of God. All people have worth. And that value is independent of their successes or failures. This God that we worship doesn't care where you went to college or how many degrees you earned, how much money is in the bank or the model of your car or the address on your driver's license. He sees value in all of us, and Oglethorpe's faith was a personification of that belief. At the heart of the Christian faith lies the grace of God. And grace is about God's undeserved love. The word the poor who came from Europe, who came here, didn't necessarily deserve it. It was undeserved love. And C.B. said on these, not for self, but for others. And we must, if we celebrate Oglethorpe, we must recognize that to celebrate and commemorate him is to believe that all God's children deserve a second chance to help rebuild their lives. These are the actions of people of faith. The next day, on October 7th, 1996, which was also the final day of our 4-day privilege, Governor Zell Miller led us to our final stop. And that stop was at another church, the Parish Church of All Saints, located in the village of Cranham, about 19 miles northeast of London. We entered that 700-year-old church, and to my surprise, James Oglethorpe and his wife Elizabeth are buried beneath the floor of the sanctuary. The tombs covered by red carpet. Following a brief memorial service, we placed a wreath on the tomb, and our British host ushered us to an adjacent meeting hall. But I lingered behind, because erected near his tomb is a white marble plaque. And on that white marble plaque are listed Oglethorpe's accomplishments and platitudes. Oxford, military hero, member of parliament, author, father of Georgia. And as I read that white marble plaque erected by his wife, I happened upon an 8-word sentence. And it stated, he was the friend of the oppressed Negro. He was the friend of the oppressed Negro. Oglethorpe last drew breath on this earth in 1785. And as I stood there encased in the silence of that church, 6 feet from the fountain of Georgia, somehow believing that I may have been the first and maybe the only black Georgian ever to visit that grave. In my heart and in my spirit, he spoke to me. And he said, Mike, I am your friend. Thank you all. As I was saying, and by the way, Todd said that I have the spirit of Oglethorpe. Not only did Oglethorpe found Georgia, but he was also the first white man in North America to speak out against the evils of the transatlantic slave trade. And let me tell you something, when he spoke out, he was also not only the first one to speak out, but he was also one of the most despised persons to live in Georgia colony. He was not loved by those who opposed his views. I suspect that some days when he got up to speak, there might have been a few people in the back saying, let slavery in. But what I'm saying, I set out on this 27-year journey to determine whether or not James Oglethorpe's, that statement on that plaque was in fact true. Because I, quite frankly, initially rejected it. I did not set out to write a book that would conclude that James Oglethorpe became an abolitionist. I really set out to write a book to discredit the statement that was carved in white stone. I'm not going to tell you that James Oglethorpe is some sanitized figure. He was not. When you meet James Oglethorpe in my book, he's not an abolitionist. He's not even an anti-slavery advocate. Let me tell you what he is. He's deputy governor of the Royal African Company, a notorious slave trading firm. He's a member of the British Parliament in the House of Commons, and he's chairman of the Bray Association, an evangelical society whose primary mission is to convert and Christianize enslaved blacks. When you meet Oglethorpe, he's not this perfect person. But let me tell you, the most important thing about this book is not who he was, but the journey to who he became. So how does Oglethorpe go from slave trader, deputy governor, being among those who breathed life into the abolitionist movement? He received a letter written by an enslaved young black man in the Maryland colony. The young black man was named Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, who had been captured on the west coast of Africa and transported and enslaved on a tobacco plantation in Maryland. Diallo, after a failed escape attempt, convinced his enslaver to allow him to write a letter addressed to his father back in Africa. Now, what's unique about that statement? You can read it right. He wrote a letter. The prevailing narrative is that all enslaved black people were what? Illiterate. Those of you, like Oglethorpe, by the way, who was an expert in Greek, Roman, and ancient African civilization. Let me say that again. Oglethorpe was a renowned and respected expert in ancient Greek, Roman, and African civilization. Those of you who study ancient African history will share with you that some of the first libraries and the first universities established on this planet were established where? On the west coast of Africa, in a place called Timbuktu. So Diallo was a well-educated young man who wrote a letter, convinced his employer to allow him to do it, and the letter travels 4,000 miles across the Atlantic, passed through the hands of 4 or 5 white men in the Atlantic slave trade, and arrives in London. Think about it. A letter written by an enslaved man, transported across the Atlantic. No UPS, no FedEx. We thank God he didn't put it in the U.S. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Let's give the U.S. Postal Service. So the letter arrives in London and falls into the possession of who? James Oglethorpe. However, the letter is written not in English, but in Arabic. Diallo was a Muslim. So Oglethorpe, being the inquisitive and quite frankly, brilliant man that he was, puzzled over this letter. He sent it to Oxford University, where he had attended school, had it interpreted. And the contents of the letter was so powerful and so affecting, Oglethorpe arranges with Diallo's enslaver to purchase his freedom and to pay his passage from Maryland back to London. Contemporary sources say that Diallo became a roaring lion of British society. And eventually is welcomed at court as the King and Queen of England. So I hear the question you're asking. What the heck was in the letter? that were gleaned from the letter. First and foremost, the letter was written by who? An enslaved black person. The prevailing belief throughout Europe and across the planet was that enslaved black people were subhuman. That we were purchased and sold like animals. That we did not possess the intellectual capacity of human beings. And all of a sudden, there was a letter written by an enslaved black man. Oglethorpe understood that the ability to read and write are traits of civilized human behavior. In the letter, DeKalb talks about his parents, his grandparents. He speaks of his love for his wife and his 4 children. Family are traits of what? Human civilized behavior. And thirdly, more than anything else, he praises Allah. Monotheism is a trait of civilized human behavior. Based on those 3 things, Oglethorpe realizes that this enslaved black man was not a subhuman beast, but he was in fact a member of the human family. Oglethorpe sells his stock in the Royal African Company, resigns his position as deputy governor of the RAC, gets on a boat called the Ann, sails to the Savannah Harbor, climbs up the Yamaha, plants the British Jack, founds the Georgia colony as the only British American colony to prohibit slavery prior to the American Revolution. Let me say it again. Georgia is the only British American colony that prohibited chattel slavery prior to the American Revolution. Not those liberal outposts in Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey, but Georgia. One of his most vocal supporters in his anti-slavery advocacy was a young evangelist named John Wesley. There is this narrative, there's this story that John Wesley's ministry was basically a failure here in America. And there's this allegation of some affair with a woman that he may have had a relationship with. Was not told. What my research shows is that John Wesley's failure had little or anything to do with an affair. What really happened is that pro-slavery forces in Georgia, the richest colonists, wanted to bring slavery into this colony. John Wesley spoke very passionately against slavery. He saw it for what it was, and worst of all, he believed that enslaved black people were human beings who possessed redeemable souls. He wanted to convert enslaved black people. Most of the history you read about Wesley is that he came here to convert Native Indians. Left out is the fact that a prime focus of his ministry was to convert enslaved blacks. And worse than that, he believed that a redeemed soul, even if it was a black person, would have equal access to the kingdom of God as a white soul. The folks here hated John Wesley. One man in particular, Robert Williams, wanted to be a slave trader himself. He was his chief protagonist. And John Wesley would run out of Georgia. A few years later, James Oglethorpe was what? Run out of Georgia. Matter of fact, in 1743, James Oglethorpe sailed from this port to face court-martial for treason, which is a crime punishable by death, and possible financial ruin because Parliament would not reimburse him for the substantial sums of money he put in his company. The message. If you really seek, to pursue not just a model, I think it was a calling, not for self, but for others. If you look out at this audience and see not black folk and white folk and Republicans and Democrats, but members of the human family, if we treat each other with respect, if we offer those of us who might be downtrodden, poor and unemployed and homeless, if we offer them a second chance, don't think that you will always receive a ticker tape. There will always be those who criticize you and take issue with you. But let me tell you something. The men and women who opposed Oglethorpe, who wanted to bring slavery into the state, and I'll stop with this. You know, the narrative is that Oglethorpe had this foolish idea, Oglethorpe's father, that he thought that he could create a society without slave labor, and that it was a foolish idea. It lasted for 10 years and it failed. Matter of fact, Oglethorpe died believing he had failed. I'll leave you with this. James Oglethorpe did not fail. We live in a slave-free Georgia. James Oglethorpe's vision became who we are today. James Oglethorpe's vision when slavery was in every colony, his vision became the American dream. We live in a slave-free Georgia. We live in a slave-free country. And the first man to dream that dream was James Oglethorpe. He did not fail. His idea, his vision won. And I leave you with this, what I call a bold new vision of Georgia. And it's a vision that was inspired by James Oglethorpe's original vision. One Georgia. Not a black Georgia, white Georgia, North Georgia, South Georgia, rich Georgia, poor Georgia, one Georgia. It offers opportunity for those on the margins of society. One Georgia that will open up its doors and give substance and support for all who come and seek to be a part of this James Oglethorpe's original vision, more than a vision, a call, a dream, and a hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We got started late. We had an unscheduled stop in our flight, but we are here to take some questions. Brianna and Portia have microphones. If you have a question, please raise your hand, let them come to you, and I will repeat the question.
Good evening. I've enjoyed the presentation very much. I just have one question to ask about the
Hang on.
Oglethorpe's response to the person that he tried to get back to England. How do you think he safely was able to transport him back, since, you know, in those days we weren't freely able to move about the country anywhere else, but and particularly on ships? How was he able to get him back over there safely?
Can you repeat the question, Michael?
How was Diallo able to get back to England or get to England? Well, he was property. And until he arrived in England, he was still an enslaved person. And so other slave traders, there was a piece of property that they were trading, and he was transported there. Remember, that transaction occurred prior to Oglethorpe leaving the Royal African Company. So he was just property, like 12 million other Africans that were transported from Africa to the Americas and to North America. Diallo was one of 400,000 Africans who were disembarked 40% of them right up the river in South Carolina. South Carolina was the prime deembarkation location here in North America. 40% of all Africans were brought to Charleston and Georgetown, and later, once slavery was legalized, here in Savannah. One of the things I want to talk about, what was about Georgia, one of the things that really surprised me, when you think about slavery and enslaved laborers, you see them working where? In a cotton field. What really drove the expansion of slavery from South Carolina to Georgia was not cotton, but it was rice. I was at Warmslow last week, and I was able to see a fallow rice field. It was rice, and it was called the Golden Seed. And that was this effort. The most valuable enslaved African that could be purchased were from the west coast of Africa, because there were people who had cultivated rice for 3 millennia. And they were bought here specifically for their brains and their bronze. Peter Wood, in his book, Black Majority, said those plantations weren't really plantations, but they were work camps and gulag. And so rice was the prime motivator. And you know all about it. You read about it, you hear it, but we hadn't thought about it. The descendants of those first rice growers are the Gullah Geechee, because they were enslaved on these isolated islands where they were not integrated, or they chose not to be integrated in the more general society. They maintained their spirituality, their customs, their language. The descendants of those first rice growers are the Gullah Geechee, who are fighting for their lives and their history. And let's give them a round of applause in support of their fight that is taking place right now. Thank you.
Michael, right over here.
Okay, good evening. I'm 5th generation Georgian, and I have relatives that are from Haiti. And our story is that James Oglethorpe brought the first indentured servants to this area from Haiti. So I'd like you to comment on that, please.
Well, there was an influx of people, many of them mixed race, from Haiti after the revolution. That was in 1808. They came to Savannah, and many of them were free black Haitians, came here and dramatically increased the number of free blacks living in Savannah. Savannah has always been different. I'm just telling you, Savannah has been different. And it's no coincidence that the first independent black church on the planet was established where? Right here in Savannah. Right here in Savannah. And one of the reasons that was so, I believe, obviously there was a tremendous amount of faith and struggle in the blacks who understood becoming a Christian was also an anti-slavery strategy. See, if you think about this whole idea of Christianity, think about what I said about Wesley, that a black soul and a white soul would have equal access to the kingdom of God. You could be a slave on earth, but at least there was one place, at least during the slave period, where what? You could be what? Equal. That's why we used to sing that song, what, by and by? Somebody sing that song for me. By, come. the belief that I could be equal in heaven was a prerequisite for me wanting to be equal where? Right here on earth. So becoming a Christian, and one of the things I do, and I'll come to my friend Ms. Glass, is prehistory. Prehistory. There was an anti-slavery, before abolitionism, there was a period of anti-slavery activism. I'll start with this. There's not, all white people did not support slavery. There were some white people, very few, but some white people had the courage to stand up and call it for what it was. That it was ungodly, it was inhumane, and that it should not stand. James Oglethorpe and John Wesley were two of those.
Michael, let's take one more question.
My sister.
Good afternoon.
No, I got to get some students.
Yes.
Good afternoon, CEO Thurmond. I happen to be a native Atlantan, and my mom has lived in your county for over 40 years. But I really enjoyed your talk. You and I have known each other for quite some time. I am a member of this church, and I am a lay Eucharistic minister here at this church. Your presentation deeply resonated within my heart in terms of Oglethorpe's original plan. Being a Christian, being a person of faith, which is a great part of my life, I want to know, given your take on Oglethorpe and his original plan regarding faith and religion, what lessons can churches, this church and other churches, learn from Oglethorpe's original plan so that we can begin to bridge these tremendous gaps in our society and in our community?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for all the great work you're doing with Susie King Taylor and your research, and thank you for being my friend. The original vision was an economic development project and a social welfare project. They're not mutually exclusive. You can have economic growth and create jobs and also invest in helping those who are less fortunate or not with resources that you have. You don't have to choose. In Georgia, we're the #1 state in business, but we had a horrible prison and rehabilitation system. We have a horrible program for people with disabilities. We can do better by our schools. You don't have to choose. Oglethorpe recognized you can do both. You can do both. That's what I learned. And you know, when I think of Oglethorpe, when I see homeless people, when he passed the law that freed 10,000 debtors from British prisons in 1729, sometimes you solve one problem, but if you free 10,000 unemployed British debtors, where are they going? They become homeless. But what was unique, he didn't see refuge or waste. He saw potential. Let me hear from the
Take a
scholars.
question from the student over here.
Hello. I just want to say that I really enjoyed your presentation. It kind of, let's see, sorry,
No, take your time. Take your time.
it was very impactful, and it's just, whenever you hear about history just kind of on paper, it feels maybe a little morally corrupt now that we've advanced and we know what is right and wrong. But I just wanted to tell you it was a great presentation. And a question I had was, so did Oglethorpe, after getting Diablo's letter, did he, was it like the language that he used and just kind of thinking about it in retrospect and with empathy, did that make him, not make him, but kind of make his mindset a bit more towards the abolitionist and just kind of think, you know, we're all human? Or was it more so just, like, or was it just he felt for Diablo, like, specifically, like, not all other enslaved people, but just him, if that makes sense?
No, that's a great question. Empathy is an important word. It's next level sympathy is empathy, where you put, you don't just, I'm not just concerned about you, that I can emotionally and psychologically put myself in the position you are standing in. So what it did, it triggered him, because they are triggers. And over time, he became the abolitionist. If a nonfiction book can have a subtext, is that we can be better than who we are. You can start deputy governor of a slaving company and become this man who breathes life into an international movement that breaks the chain of Anglo-American slavery. You can do that. We're not captive of who we are. That's the message for young people. And the final thing, friend. He was able to be a friend to people who didn't look like him, who were a different color, maybe a different religion, but he could still be a friend. And the main thing, I would hope that the young people here just be friends. It's just that simple. Be friends. Be friends. Yeah, be a friend. And it's a simple word, but just think, 300 years later, I think Elizabeth Oglethorpe carved that word just for me. Friend. God bless y'all. Thank y'all so much. Thank you.
Michael is, thank you, Michael. He's going to be right over here to my left signing books. Once you get on over there, because you're going to be popular in a moment. If you haven't bought a book, you can buy it. Yep.
I apologize to you all for the brief interruption, but my day job, I'm a politician. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for coming.